Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah, wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. So the last class that we had, we took the last portion of the statement of the author alayhi rahmatullah where he mentioned وَالْمِرَاءُ فِيهِ كُفْرٌ, that disputing concerning it is disbelief. And this was with regard to the person who says that the Quran is created. For a person to debate with somebody else and try to convince him that the Quran is created, this is disbelief. This is disbelief. And it's not an issue of difference of opinion like you have when it comes to masail fiqhiyya, right? Issues of jurisprudence. And we mentioned numerous examples before, whether you put your hands on your chest after ruku', or if you put your hands on your side, or whether you go down with your hands first or your knees. These are issues where the scholars, they differ. And based upon the proof and evidence and how the scholars understood it, the person, especially if a person is not, a talib ilm, he's not a student of knowledge, then he goes with the scholar that he feels the most comfortable with. But this is not that same type of issue. When it comes to the issue of the Quran being the speech of Allah, is not created, this is an issue that there's no doubt concerning. It's an issue of creed. It's an issue of creed. So the next portion that we're going to take tonight, bi'idhnillah, is a very, very, very important topic. The author alayhi rahmatullah, he said, قال المؤلف رحمه الله والإيمان بالرؤية يوم القيامة. The author, Imam al-Barbahārī alayhi rahmatullah, and he said that believing in al-ru'ya, right? Seeing, meaning seeing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the day of judgment. This is a part of our creed. يَرَوْنَ اللَّهَ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ بِأَعْيُنِ رُؤُوسِهِمْ. Allah Azza wa Jal, or they will see Allah Azza wa Jal with their eyes, meaning the believers. On the day of judgment, and the hereafter, the believers will see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with their eyes. وَهُوَ يُحَاسِبُهُمْ بِلَا حَاجِبٍ وَلَا تُرْجُمَانٍ. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to take them into account, and there's not going to be a partition or a veil, and there's not going to be an interpreter. It's not going to be a translator. Like in this dunya, if a person was to go to another country, and they don't speak the language of that country, you need someone to translate for you. Right? When brothers go for Hajj or Umrah and they don't speak Arabic, they need a middleman. Right? So that's not going to be the case on Yawm al-Qiyamah. When a person is being taken into account for his actions that he did in this world, there's not going to be a partition between that person and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, nor an interpreter. Al-Sharh, in the explanation, Shaykh al-Fawzan, حفظه he says, وَمِن مَسَائِلِ الْعَقِيدَةِ الْمُهِمَّةِ الْعَظِيمَةِ إِثْبَاتُ وَأَنَّ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ يَرَوْنَ رَبَّهُمْ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ عِيَانًا بِأَبْصَارِهِمْ. So this issue is very, very important. He says one of the very important issues of creed is affirming that the believers will see their Lord on the day of judgment with their eyes. With their eyes. كَمَا يَرَوْنَ الْقَمَرَ لَيْلَةَ الْبَدْرِ. As they can see the moon, right, when it's a night, when the moon is full. وَكَمَا يَرَوْنَ الشَّمْسَ صَحْوًا لَيْسَ دُونَهَا سَحَابٍ. And just as they see the sun when it's clear, and there's no clouds obscuring it. كما جاء في الأحاديث الصحيحة التي تواترت في إثبات رؤية المؤمنين لربهم. As it has come in authentic ahadith which are متواترة, right? They are established, right? So many narrations from so many trustworthy narrators, right? It's an issue of a tawatur, right? It's established regarding or the affirmation of the believer seeing the Lord. وقد ساق الإمام ابن القيم في هادي الأرواح الأحاديث الواردة في هذا. And Imam Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala, he mentions in his book Hadi al-Arwah, he mentions the ahadith that have been reported regarding this matter. وَتَوَسَّعَ فِي ذَلِكَ بِأَسَانِيدِهَا. And he elaborated upon this with the different chains of narrations for these ahadith. وهي متواترة في إثبات أن المؤمنين يرون ربهم عيانا بأبصارهم. And these are reports or narrations that are established. There's so many of these narrations from so many reliable narrators that establish that the believers are going to see their Lord with their eyes on the Day of Judgment. وخالف في ذلك أهل الضلال من الفرق الضالة كالمعتزلة ومن ذهب مذهبهم. And the people who oppose this and they go against this are none other than أهل الضلال. Right? The people who are upon misguidance from the different misguided sects such as the Mu'tazila and those who have their same view. فنفوا الرؤيا. So they negate and they deny that the believers are going to see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the hereafter. And this issue, similar to the issue that came already with regard to the Quran being the speech of Allah and it's not created, this is a very important issue. So we just mentioned one of the groups that deny that the believers are going to see their Lord on the Day of Judgment is the Mu'tazila. So if a person was to hold this belief and say that the believers are not going to see their Lord, is that a statement of disbelief or no? You say disbelief. Anyone oppose that? Or everybody's on the same? You say it's disbelief? For a person to say that the believers will not see their Lord in the hereafter, it's disbelief. طيب, Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, he said, والذي عليه جمهور السلف أن من جحد رؤية الله في الدار الآخرة فهو كافر. So Ibn Taymiyyah عليه rahmatullah, he said, that which the majority of the Salaf are upon, Jumhur al-Salaf, right? The majority of the Salaf are upon is that the person who denies that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to be seen in the hereafter, this person is a disbeliever. فإن كان ممن لم يبلغ العلم في ذلك عرف ذلك. So this is also important. So we took the ruling. The ruling is that a person is a disbeliever. But there's some detail. He said if this is a person whom that knowledge has not come to, right? He's not aware that this is the case, that the believers are going to see their Lord in the hereafter. If this is his situation, that the knowledge has not come to him pertaining to this, عرف ذلك, then he's to be informed. Right? You don't just say you're a kafir automatically like that, right? Some brothers, they're hasty. Even when it comes to issues of tabdi', right? Saying that person is an innovator. Sometimes people, they're way too hasty. So there's some detail. So a person is to be informed. كما يعرف من لم تبلغه شرائع الإسلام. Just as a person whom the laws of Islam have not reached him, he's to be informed. فإن أصر على الجحود بعد بلوغ العلم له فهو كافر. But this is the catch. If a person is persistent after that, after the knowledge comes to him, and he's still saying that the believers will not see their Lord. A person mentions some ayat, he gives some authentic ahadith from Sahih al-Barbahārī and Sahih Muslim, and then after that the person says, go ahead with that. The believers are not going to see the Lord. At that point, he says if a person is persistent upon denying this after the knowledge comes to him, then he's a disbeliever. And it was narrated that it was mentioned to Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, rahimahullah ta'ala, that there was a person who said, Inna Allah ta'ala la yura fil akhirah. He said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not going to be seen in the hereafter. So when Imam Ahmad heard this, فَغَضِبَ غَضَبًا شَدِيدًا, right? He became very angry. So a lot of times with us, when we become angry, a lot of times it's because of personal reasons. Right? Personal reasons. That's the reason why we get angry, right? But Imam Ahmad, he wasn't getting angry for a personal reason. He was getting angry for the sake of Allah. He became very angry. ثُمَّ قَالَ مَنْ قَالَ بِأَنَّ اللَّهَ تَعَالَى لَا يُرَى فِي الْآخِرَةِ فَقَدْ كَفَرَ. And he said, whoever says that Allah is not going to be seen in the hereafter, he has disbelieved. عَلَيْهِ لَعْنَةُ اللَّهِ وَغَضَبُهُ. Right, upon him is the curse of Allah and his anger. So this issue right here is not a light issue. This issue of the believer seeing the Lord in the hereafter is not a light issue. If a person was to deny it and say that's not the case, and the knowledge has come to him, this is disbelief. That takes a person outside of the fold of Islam. So Shaykh Fawzan, he says, وَهِيَ مَذْكُورَةٌ فِي الْقُرْآنِ. This issue of the believer seeing the Lord is mentioned in the Quran. قال تعالى لِلَّذِينَ أَحْسَنُوا الْحُسْنَ وَزِيَادَةً. In Surah Yunus. For those who did good, they will have good and extra. For those who did good, they shall have good and extra. جاء في صحيح مسلم أن الزيادة هي النظر إلى وجه الله سبحانه وتعالى. So it's reported, and keep in mind, the Sunnah, it explains the Quran. The Quran explains the Quran, and sometimes the Sunnah explains the Quran. So it comes in Sahih Muslim that what's intended by a ziyada, extra right here, is looking at the face of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the hereafter. وَقَالَ تَعَالَى لَهُمْ مَا يَشَاءُونَ فِيهَا وَلَدَيْنَا مَزِيدٌ. And for them, meaning the believers, they will have that which they desire and extra, mazid. وَالْمَزِيد هُوَ النَّظَرُ إِلَى وَجْهِ اللَّهِ سُبْحَانَهُ وَتَعَالَى. And likewise, al-mazid or extra right here is the same meaning. It means that they're going to look at the face of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَجَاءَ فِي سُورَةِ الْقِيَامَةِ. And likewise, it comes in Surah Al-Qiyamah. وُجُوهٌ يَوْمَئِذٍ نَاظِرَةٌ إِلَى رَبِّهَا نَاظِرَةٌ. Some faces on that day are going to be radiant. إِلَى رَبِّهَا نَاظِرَةٌ. They're going to be looking at their Lord. نَاظِرَةٌ بِالضَّادِ مِنَ النُّضْرَةِ وَهِيَ الْبَهَاءِ. So, we already translated it, but right, نَاظِرَةٌ, it means shining or radiant. That's how some faces on that day are going to be, on the day of judgment. In the hereafter. تَعْرِفُ فِي وُجُوهِهِمْ نَظْرَةَ النَّعِيمِ. Right, this is another verse. And you will recognize in their faces the joy or the delight of that radiance. That joy or that delight of that radiance. You will recognize this in their faces. إِلَى رَبِّهَا نَاظِرَةٌ. And then he goes back to the verse. إِلَى رَبِّهَا نَاظِرَةٌ. They will be looking at their Lord. بِالضَّاءِ أي بأبصارها تنظر إلى الله جل وعلا. That is, they will see them. They will see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with their physical eyes. And this is important because some people, they might make ta'wil and they're saying they're not really seeing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or something like this. No, they're going to see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The believers are going to see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with their physical eyes. He says يتنعمون بذلك أشد مما يتنعمون بنعيم الجنة. So, the believers in paradise, they're going to, when they see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's not like us in this dunya. Perhaps if a person sees like a mansion or some type of car, a Bugatti or something that's worth $1 million, right? If you see it, right, you might get, all happy or wow, like that, right? And then after a few seconds, that's it. Everything's back to normal. Life goes on as it normally goes on. Right? When the believers see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the hereafter, this is going to be the best thing in terms of pleasure and delight that they're going to enjoy more so than any other pleasure or joy in paradise. So just think about some of the joys and the delights that await the believers in the hereafter. Where are some of the rewards or some of the joys and the fruits? I'm not talking about physical fruits, but that await the believers in the hereafter. Hura'in, right? The women, right? The women,
children,
the boys, the servants. Na'am.
Rivers of honey and
rivers of honey, rivers of khamr, right? And in this life, khamr, wine is not permissible. But in hereafter, it's going to be permissible. It's not going to cause intoxication. It's not going to cause hangovers, headaches, nothing like that. What else?
silver and gold.
Trees.
Nah.
hadith that
How is it made out of silver and gold?
Nah.
Bathroom.
You don't have to go to the bathroom.
No bathroom.
You don't. No person will not have the need to go to the bathroom. In the hadith, the Prophet ﷺ, there was a man who came to him, and he asked the Prophet ﷺ, how will the people, relieve themselves? And he mentioned that it's going to be a sweat that's going to come from the pores like misk. It's going to have a fragrance of misk. It's going to smell good. Right? And this dunya is ma'lum. It's well known how it is. Right? In the hereafter, none of that. What else?
The bird coming in front of you, trying to food.
The different food. In paradise, a person can eat as much as they want.
No sleep.
You're not going to gain weight. No sleep. No need for sleep. What else? Something that's more obvious.
Like physical things?
And physical things. We're talking about, it could be anything.
The
garments, all of these different things.
Garment, silk and gold.
Now, ahsan, we mentioned that. We're talking in terms of the clothing, the food. Something that's more obvious is that there's no death. You're going to live forever. لا يذوقون فيها الموت إلا الموتة الأولى. They're not going to taste death except for the first death. Right? When you die in this dunya, right, it's only one death. So depending on a person's situation in the hereafter, right, whether they're inhabitant of paradise, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us from the inhabitants of paradise, or if a person is from the inhabitants of the hellfire, that's it. On Yawm al-Qiyamah, maut is going to cease to exist. Death is going to cease to exist. So in paradise, it's no more death. Person's not going to get sick. Right? A person's not going to have, need to buy medicine. A person's always going to be in a youthful state. Right? Have all of this vigor, all of this energy. SubhanAllah. It's going to be things that we can't even fathom or imagine. We can just talk about it for hours, but at the end of the day, we still won't be able to fathom and comprehend the reality of paradise. In the hadith of Qudsi, Allah Jalla wa Ala said, أعددت لعبادي الصالحين ما لا عين رأت ولا أذن سمعت ولا خطر على قلب بشر. He said, subhanahu wa ta'ala, the meaning of the hadith, I have prepared for my righteous servants that which no eye has ever seen. In this dunya, everything's relative. Even the fruit that's mentioned in the Quran, Rumman, and so on and so forth, pomegranate, and so on, it's just names. When you're in paradise, it's not going to look the same. It's not going to taste the same. مَا لَا عَيْنٌ رَأَتْ, right? That which no eye has seen. وَلَا أُذُنٌ سَمِعَتْ, no ear has ever heard. Then you're going to hear things in paradise. Bi-idhnillah, inshallah, we hear things in paradise that we never even heard in this dunya. وَلَا خَطَرَ عَلَى قَلْبِ بَشَرٍ. All right, a person has never even thought of. Things that you can't even think of. That's the reality of paradise. We can't fathom or understand how it's really going to be. But on top of all of that, all of those joys and those pleasures, looking at Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the hereafter is greater than all of that. Is greater than all of that. It comes in a narration. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wa ala alihi wa sallam used to say, وَأَسْأَلُكَ لَذَّةَ النَّظَرِ إِلَى وَجْهِكَ وَالشَّوْقِ إِلَى لِقَائِكَ. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wa sallam used to say, I asked you, meaning, O Allah, for the delight of looking at your face and longing to meet you. Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala, he mentions al-Jawab al-Kafi. إذا عرف هذا فأعظم نعيم الآخرة ولذاتها هو النظر إلى وجه الرب جل جلاله. So if this is known, right, this is understood, then the greatest joy in the hereafter is looking at the face of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَسَمَاعُ كَلَامِهِ مِنْ, and hearing His speech directly from Him. Right? In this world, when we read the Quran, we know it came by way of Jibreel to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We didn't hear it directly from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In the hereafter, we're going to hear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's speech directly from Him. وَسَمَاعُ كَلَامِهِ مِنْ, we're going to hear His speech. And hearing His speech directly from him. وَالْقُرْبِ مِنْ, and being close to him. And it comes in a hadith that's in the Sahih. The Prophet ﷺ said, فَوَاللَّهِ مَا أَعْطَاهُمْ شَيْئًا أَحَبَّ إِلَيْهِمْ مِنَ النَّظَرِ إِلَيْهِ. He said, by Allah, they will not be given anything that's more beloved to them than looking at his face. And it comes in another hadith, the Prophet ﷺ said, أَنَّهُ إِذَا تَجَلَّى لَهُمْ وَرَأَوْهُ نَسُوا مَا هُمْ فِيهِ مِنَ النَّعِيمِ. The Prophet ﷺ mentioned that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala appears to the inhabitants of paradise, they're going to forget about all of the joys and that bliss and that happiness that they're in. All the things that we just mentioned. They're going to forget about all that when they see the face of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Ibn al-Qayyim alayhi rahmatullah, he also said, فَأَطْيَبُ مَا فِي الدُّنْيَا مَعْرِفَتُهُ وَمَحَبَّتُهُ. He said the best thing in this world is to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to love Him. وَأَلَذُّ مَا فِي الْجَنَّةِ رُؤْيَتُهُ وَمُشَاهَدَتُهُ. And the best thing in the hereafter, or in paradise rather, is to see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, so the greatest joy in the hereafter for the believers is to see the face of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Shaykh Fawzan, he says, هذا في القرآن الكريم. This is in the Quran. وفي سورة المطففين قال في الكفار. And in Surah Al-Mutaffifin, Allah Jalla wa Ala, He said regarding the disbelievers, كَلَّا إِنَّهُمْ عَنْ رَبِّهِمْ يَوْمَئِذٍ لَمَحْجُوبُونَ. وَعَلَيْكُمُ السَّلَامُ. No, they will be veiled from seeing their Lord on that day. They will be veiled from seeing their Lord on that day. مَحْجُوبٌ عَنْ رُؤْيَةِ اللَّهِ. They're going to be screened. They won't have the ability to see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فإذا كان الكفار محجوبين عن رؤية الله فهذا دليل على أن المؤمنين يرون ربهم عز وجل. So this verse right here, كلا إنهم عن ربهم يومئذ لمحجوبون. No, or nay, in Old English, they will be veiled or screened from seeing their Lord on that day. The fact, Shaykh Fawzan, he says, the fact that the disbelievers are going to be screened from seeing Allah, are covered, and they will not have the ability to see Allah, this is a proof that the believers will be able to see the Lord. وَذَلِكَ أَنَّ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ آمَنُوا بِهِ فِي الدُّنْيَا وَلَمْ يَرَوْهُ. And this is because the believers, they believed in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this life and they didn't see Him. You see the Christians, what do? They have depictions of what they say is Jesus. Some of them got Him as a white guy, right, as a European. We know that wasn't the case. He wasn't from Europe. Some of them have Him as a darker complexion, but nonetheless, it's all batil, it's all falsehood, right? For the Christians or many of the kuffar, it's as though they have to have something tangible so they can see how their Lord looks, right? They have to have some type of depiction. It could be just made up, right? They don't care, but they have to have something to see that, this is their Lord, that they worship and they pray to. Right? But for the believers, right, the Muslims, we believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but we don't see Him. In this world, we don't have the ability to see Him. بَلْ اِعْتَمَدُوا عَلَى الْبَرَاهِينَ فَآمَنُوا بِهِ. But rather, the believers, they depended upon the proofs and the evidences. فَآمَنُوا بِهِ. So they believed in Allah, based upon that. Based upon what comes in the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. We don't have the ability to see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَصَدَّقُوا رُسُولَهُ. And they believed His messengers. They believed in His messengers. فَآمَنُوا بِهِ. So they believed in Him. وَلَمْ يَرَوْهُ فِي الدُّنْيَا. But they didn't see Him in this world. فَأَكْرَمَهُمُ اللَّهُ فِي الْجَنَّةِ فَتَجَلَّى لَهُمْ وَرَأَوْهُ عِيَانًا. So because of this, because the believers, they believed in the proofs and the evidences, or they depended upon the proofs and evidences found in the Quran and the Sunnah, and they believed what the messengers came with. They believed in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala even though they didn't see Him. So because of this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to honor them in paradise, and He's going to appear before them, and they're going to see Him with their eyes. They're going to see Him with their physical eyes. لَمَّا آمَنُوا بِهِ فِي الدُّنْيَا وَلَمْ يَرَوْهُ. Because they believed in Him in this dunya even though they didn't see Him. وَأَمَّا الْكُفَّارِ لَمَّا كَفَرُوا بِهِ فِي الدُّنْيَا حَجَبَهُمُ اللَّهُ عَنْ رُؤْيَتِهِ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ جَزَاءً لَهُمْ. And because the disbelievers disbelieved in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this world, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to screen Himself from them seeing Him on the Day of Judgment. Jaza'an lahum. This is a recompense for them. This is a punishment for them. And he mentions a verse, Jaza'an wifaqa, as a suitable recompense. The next portion that the Sheikh Fawzan is going to mention is actually some doubts that the Mu'tazila and Ahlul Bid'ah try to use to justify that, or they try to use as a proof to say that the believers will not see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the hereafter. We're going to take that bi'idhnillah next class, and we'll suffice with this. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.